Welcome to the Table Leadership Podcast, where everyone is invited to pull up a seat, and all leaders have a voice to contribute to the conversation. We're glad you could join us today. And now, your host, Cyon Edgerton.
So I'll just give it the 10. I'll bump it up to 10.
We'll just round it up.
Right.
I love it. We've had some good times.
Oh,
So
yeah,
for
sure.
everybody that doesn't have the honor of knowing you, just introduce yourself real quick. Tell us a little bit about you, about your family. You've got a beautiful wife and some really beautiful babies. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I am from Hampton, Virginia. Well, I'm really not from Hampton. I'm from Phoebus, Virginia. There's a difference.
There
and
is.
I want everybody in the world to know that. I'm from Phoebus. But
hey, tell us real quick, what is the difference between being from Hampton and being from Phoebus? Because this is important.
It's just the culture and the environment, the community, just everything that's there in Phoebus. Fort Monroe is there. That's where the first landing of the first Africans from Africa, transatlantic slave trade, all that happened there. And it's just a pride in Phoebus. It's just pride. You got historic things, and it's just the pride of Phoebus. So you want to tell people I'm from Phoebus. I'm not from Hampton. I'm from Phoebus.
That's right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, so what else about you?
So born and raised Hampton in Phoebus, graduated from Hampton University. I was a music major. I was in the band, doing all of that. My parents are preachers, so I'm a PK. That's kind of now I lead worship now, creative arts director at the church, songwriter, do some recording. But here recently, it's always been a passion of mine, but I've been able to really use my voice a little stronger, being an anti-racist and speaking out on social injustice, things like that. My dad was the president of the Hampton branch of the NAACP. So I grew up going to NAACP meetings my whole entire life.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was the president.
Yeah, my dad was the president of the Hampton branch for years. Those meetings were always at Monday at 7:00. I don't know why I remember that, but I just remember it. Yeah, so that's what I do. I'm married to my wife, Shanika. We'll be married 5 years in December.
Woo, congratulations.
Thank you. Got a 3-year-old, Reagan. She'll be 4 in November. And then Ryan, it will be 2 in March.
She's already almost 2.
And we found out this week that she's basically potty trained herself.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm amazed. Literally. All of this happened this week. So
and how has it been adjusting to 2 kids, and how's Reagan doing being a big sister?
Reagan is really good with it. She has, of course, like little kids, she doesn't always like to share. Everything is hers because everything was hers for a good year and a half.
Yep.
So she's, getting over that. But she loves her sister. She loves watching out for her and showing her how she wants to be her teacher. And so she sits her down. Okay, Ryan, this is how we make an A. And this is what it is. So she loves being a teacher. And Ryan is very strong-willed. Believe she's little, but she has her little. She's the feisty one out of those two.
Yep.
So she enjoys it. They love each other. They don't fight. They don't argue too much. They like making each other laugh and all of that. Staying up all night, making each other laugh and not go to sleep, of course.
Yep, of course. Parenthood, man.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So, Chris, before we jump into the real serious stuff, let me ask you this.
Okay.
If we were gathering a group of leaders, which I know you do, I know you're heavily invested in investing in other leaders, worship leaders, and all sorts of leaders across the gamut. So if we were actually gathering a group of leaders around a real physical table so that we could talk about some leadership stuff, I have to ask, what would you be serving them? What is your go-to thing that you can actually make, or just your favorite meal and you feel like, this is the meal that would feed our bodies while we talk about leadership stuff that feeds our souls? What would it be?
This is going to be so bad. Now, neither of these 2 things, I can't make either one of them, but they would either be chicken and waffles from this place called Dames in North Carolina, in Greensboro.
Okay.
It's not just normal, just waffle with chicken. They have different kind of waffles with different kind of smears, which are like kind of different butters or flavors. That would be one. The other would be Southwestern egg rolls from Chili's. I could literally eat those every single day.
Yes,
So
those are one of my
it would
favorites.
probably be the egg rolls because they're easy to eat with your hands. So sitting around
Uh-huh.
the table, I probably would do that. But Southwestern egg rolls with the normal ranch, trust me, I would eat them every day.
That's great. I have actually had those Southwest egg rolls from Chili's, and I will say that they are amazing. But man, you got me with the chicken and waffles. I'll tell you, as much as we love living in California, the thing that I have been missing over the past few months is just some good old soul food.
Yeah, it's nothing like food from the South.
No, there's not. And if any of our listeners who live in the Northern California area have got
Right.
the down low on where I can get some good, legit soul food, I need you to like hit up our DMs or something and tell me,
Yeah.
because this poor Virginia girl needs some shrimp and grits.
Yeah, I don't know where
So,
Gladys. I think Gladys and Ron's. That might be in Los Angeles. So I don't know how far it is from you, but that's the only place that I know that
okay.
serves chicken and waffles. That's all I know.
You know, I'm writing that down right now too. Gladys and Ron's.
And
Uh-huh.
Ron's, yes.
Uh-huh. I'm going to check it out. Cool.
Yep.
All right. Well, now that we're all good and hungry,
right, of course.
let's talk about the real reason that we're here today. And so, aside from the amazing food that you would bring to the table, what is it that you bring to the leadership table?
The leadership table, I believe one of the biggest things I bring to the leadership table is the heart and the necessity for diversity. I'm a big advocate of diversity. Like that's just my thing. Like I went, even growing up, I went to a private Christian school up until 6th grade that was predominantly white.
Yeah.
It was probably only 4 black kids in the whole school, and the school was K through 12. So all my sports teams, I was always one of the 2 black kids. Just my parents always made sure that I was involved in things that exposed me to a world outside of my neighborhood, so that I wouldn't think that my world was only what was on my street, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And my parents my parents were advocates of multicultural church before it was popular. Now, my parents didn't have a multicultural church, but we always fellowshiped with churches that didn't look like us. We always did that. I mean, we did, since my dad started the church.
Right.
We always did that. So diversity, celebrating diversity is one of the things that I would bring to the leadership table. It's different when you tolerate diversity versus when you celebrate it.
Can you unpack that a little bit more? The difference between tolerating diversity and celebrating or advocating for it.
Sure. Yeah. When you tolerate diversity, you just do things to to check off a box. You have faces that look different and are different colors, but you don't really address or even listen to the concerns of those faces. You just have them so that it looks like you're multicolored. Like a lot of our churches that claim to be multicultural, or even just organizations that claim to be multicultural, they're really just multicolored. You just have a lot of colors. You don't really have a lot of cultures. So tolerating diversity would just be having it to check off a box. But celebrating diversity is when you actually submit to the voices of diversity and allow their voices to be heard and to be in the decision-making process, and not just expect them to go along with it. So that causes you to compromise. It causes you to have to listen. You may have to bend some things, or not do some things, or do some things to make everyone feel like their culture is included and is valued, and it's not just not tolerated, but you actually celebrate it. You actually are sensitive to the things that you say, the conversations you have, the reasons why you do certain things, the places where you spend your money, the places where you don't spend your money, the areas that you give money to, all of that, the people that you have on leadership, the people that are in your leadership needs to be diverse, because everyone that follows your leadership, they need to see somebody that looks like them. Because believe it or not, just seeing somebody that looks like them gives them more of an assurance that they're their feelings and their needs will be heard and
Mhm.
will actually be listened to, and not just, okay, just tolerate you for a second and then put you off to the side and let's get to the real agenda.
Mhm.
But yeah, so to me, that's the difference between tolerating and celebrating diversity.
That's good. It sounds a lot like what you're saying right now, and I've heard some leaders talk about this too, especially women. Is it's the difference between having a seat at the table and having a voice.
Yep.
And I think that first step, a lot of organizations, and like you said, a lot of churches now are wanting to be multicultural. And so they've offered seats at the table,
Yep.
but haven't actually given a voice. What are just a few quick, from your experience, practical things that leaders can do with their teams to make sure that not only have they given people a seat at the table, but they're actually giving them a voice into the conversation? What are just a couple practical things that leaders could begin doing even now that they could put into practice?
Some practical things. I'm trying to think of stuff not musical, because Coach is a wordsmith guy. So I'm trying to think of something musical. You could, things like make sure that when you are or coming up with an event or some type of thing that you're doing, make sure that that leadership committee, that planning committee, that's what I'm trying to say, that the planning committee is made up of diverse faces and diverse cultures of people. So that way you have an all-inclusive thing, instead of just being dominated by majority culture. That's one of the things that you can do. The other practical thing that you could do is, instead of meeting at, like, for example, if you meet at a place that's normally dominated by a certain culture, go to a meeting place that is from the minority culture. So, for example, if you're always meeting at a coffee shop that you see a lot of white people at, and you have some Hispanics or even African American people, try meeting at one of the Mexican restaurants.
Yeah.
A real Mexican restaurant, not Taco Bell. Like the real one, where you have to ask somebody, what is this word on the menu? So that you can learn their culture and they can feel like it, so it'll cause you to submit your what's the word I'm trying to say, your privilege to someone else, and you have to put yourself in the seat of, I'm learning now, instead of always forcing someone else to learn my culture. Because what that does, especially with leaders, it makes the people following you, the people that you're leading, it gives them assurance that you don't mind adapting, and that you don't mind putting yourself second, that you aren't always first.
Right.
And it helps people to follow you a lot easier when they know that you're not just the dictator, and you're just not my rule, my way, or the highway. So doing things like that intentionally cause you to be uncomfortable for a second. I think leaders, once you show that you're okay with being vulnerable like that, it opens up a trust to your other leaders and other people that are following you. So I hope that answered your question.
It did. That's good.
Okay.
I think there was a couple really tangible things that you said in there. And it all really does come down to surrendering and submitting our privilege, putting ourselves in the space where we, as the normally majority culture, have to be the minority culture. And even just that, like you said, changing your meeting place, putting yourself somewhere where you're not instantly comfortable is a huge part of it. And it seems like a small step, for those that are listening, it might seem like, okay, really, I want to celebrate diversity, so I'm going to change my meeting place. But I don't think we realize just how much we are driven by our privilege, or how often we can be for as a white leader, how often we are in spaces where we don't even realize it's comfortable for us because it suits our culture. And so to be able to surrender that and to lay that down and to be in a space that's not our norm or not necessarily comfortable, it gives that empathy and that shared understanding. So I think some of these little steps they're huge.
Mm-hmm.
They're huge. Now, you mentioned when you first started answering that question, you mentioned having a hard time thinking of an example that wasn't worship, and so let's talk about that, because one of the other things that that I wanted to talk about today is because, like you said, you are a worship leader, singer, songwriter, just incredibly, probably one of the most gifted and talented and so soulful worship leaders that I have ever known, just so in tune with the Spirit of God. And obviously that, and I've seen it in your family too. I mean, I know your family, I know your wife, I know your kids. I mean, that spirit of worship and being a worship leader has completely inundated your entire family.
Yes.
And so that is just, I mean, it is part of y'all's DNA.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, and you can, share your experience too, but I feel like this is one of the spaces that we as leaders, oftentimes we miss out on. Worship becomes a part of what we do on Sundays, but not actually a way of life, a lifestyle. And so we may not all be worship leaders, but I think there is value in being worshiping leaders or leaders who worship. And so what I want to hear from you is talk to me about what does it mean to be not just a worship leader, because this is not just the thing that you do on Sunday mornings. It is literally who you are. What does it mean to be a leader who worships, and where are leaders missing out by not embracing and living a lifestyle of worship? Let's just start there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's take it away from music. Because I know a lot of times we say worship, we always automatically go to music, but music is not worship. It's a way that helps us to worship, but it's not worship itself. And sometimes we get it misconstrued right there, because it has nothing to do with music. Because that would say the person who can't sing or can't play, or that's tone deaf, or that can't even hear, or that can't sing, that would disqualify from them being a worshiper. And that's totally not true. We know that the Bible says he seeks for worshipers, and he's not after the things, but he's after a broken spirit and contrite heart. So that qualifies you right there. And worship is, and like you said, it's a lifestyle. So everything that we do, the Bible says, do that as unto the Lord. So even our giving is a form of worship. Our serving is a form of worship. How we are honest on our jobs, that's a form of worship. How we are integral, that's a form of worship. How we handle conflict is a part of worship. So leaders that lead in worship, they lead by being the models of how to handle conflict, how to do things in decency and in order, how to give. I think leaders should be the first one seen giving. I think we should be the ones that model how to give. When it's time to give, when it's time to sacrifice, the leaders should be the first ones giving of their substance, saying, I believe in this, this is what I'm doing. And it lets people see, it gives them a assurance that, okay, this is good ground to sow into. This is a good move. Let's go there. Because our leader is doing this, and we trust that he or she is hearing from God. So if our leader is doing it, then hey, let's go for it. So it's very important that leaders are worshipers that way. I wouldn't say more so than in the corporate worship experience, but the corporate worship that's our time of gathering. After we leave the four walls, that's the everyday life. That's everything we learn in the four walls helps us live life outside of the four walls. So we should be seen doing the things outside of the four walls, like the giving and the serving. All of those things are forms of worship. Jesus was our perfect model as a model of worship and as a model of a servant. And of course, we know, you haven't worshiped until you've been obedient, until you said yes, until you surrendered. That's when you fully have worshiped the Father. When the Lord was telling to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Abraham, he said, let's go to the mountain to worship. Isaac had no idea he was going to be sacrificed, but let's go to worship. Worship requires sacrifice. And if you aren't sacrificing, surrendering, if you aren't saying yes, if you aren't dying to your flesh, if you aren't dying, it's not worship. I was listening to one of my brothers, Travis Green, preaching the other week, and he
Love
said,
him.
I'm probably paraphrasing it wrong, but he said, praise requires breath, worship requires death.
Mm.
So yeah, that he was talking about the whole sacrifice thing. Praise. As long as I'm breathing, and let everything that has breath praise the Lord. Only prerequisite for breath for praise is breath. If you're breathing, you can praise. But
Yeah.
to worship, you gotta die. You gotta sacrifice. Something's gotta burn. Something's gotta be given. There's gotta be some substance sacrifice there. So leaders should be the first one giving. Should be the first ones making sacrifices.
Yeah. What are some of the things that we as leaders, in order to actually live a lifestyle of worship, what are some of the things that we have to die to, especially in today's culture?
We have to die to comparison,
Mm-hmm.
um, ambition. I think those two things, um, comparison and ambition, and I think a lot of other things are under that umbrella, like fear, all that stuff. That's under, to me, comparison, because a lot of times you're fearful because you're comparing what you do to what somebody else is doing, or you don't think it's going to work because you can't do it like they do it. So
Mm-hmm.
that comparison and that ambition, you want it so bad that you tend to lose the why of why you're doing things.
Yeah.
It's just about numbers. It's just about filling seats. It's just about, again, comparing, being bigger than the church down the street, having the better sign than the churches in the area, or that ambition, wanting to be the best, wanting to be the ones that everybody looks to. I think those things get in the way, and of course that is rooted in pride. So all those things. So that's why I try to, the umbrella to me was the comparison and the ambition. Just wanting to be the top, wanting to be the best, not
Right.
necessarily going after what God is giving you to do.
Mm-hmm.
You just want to be the best. So I think those things get in the way of us being great leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. And you talked about all of these different things. You gave a few examples of things that are actually an act of worship.
Uh-huh.
And of course you threw leadership in, because that's what we're really talking about. So for the listener who just that point alone is kind of already wrecking them a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and shifting perspectives to consider that my leadership is an act of worship, that my stewarding of my influence is an act of worship. Whoa. I mean, that just completely flips everything on its head.
Right.
That requires that I look at how I'm doing what I'm doing, that I look at every aspect of my leadership, and I'm reframing it as this is an act of worship unto the Lord. So for the person that's saying, they just had their mind blown by that fact, that my leadership is an act of worship. Because then I think the next place that we go to is, so then what does that mean? What does that mean for my personal life and my personal time? What does that mean for how I'm acting my leadership out in the world? So let's start with our own personal lives, our leadership of ourselves, if you will. If my leadership is an act of worship, what changes does that necessitate just in my own personal life? And what does that look like?
Well, it all starts personal. It all starts within yourself, because whatever we do in public is only a demonstration of what we've done privately. So even if we make it look good on the outside, eventually, what's on the inside is gonna, be exposed. It's gonna come to light. But you've got to establish just a lifestyle of worship amongst yourself, and especially if you have a family. You have a family that you're leading. If you lead your family well, you'll be able to lead others well. Because your family, they see your good and they see the flaws, and they see more of them than others. So making sure that you have the daily. The thing about worship is that, like, I'm hoping I'm getting ahead of you, but my definition of worship, I guess you say that, is a lifestyle of someone who has a daily intimate relationship with God that's exhibited through obedience. So the part that I'm talking about now is the daily intimate relationship. It's got to be a daily thing. Every day, it's a new start. It's a new opportunity. It's a new challenge. So every day, you can't feed today with yesterday's bread.
Yeah.
God gives us fresh bread every day. So you got to approach fresh bread every day. You can't use the strategies that worked yesterday and think that they're going to automatically work today. So just the daily commitment to be in the will of God and to be focusing on saying yes to God. I believe here's the thing, making God the center of everything, not making him the first on the list. Because if you make him first on the list, lists can change. But when something's in the center, when it's the nucleus, everything else changes around it, but the center is going to be the center. So
That's
if
good.
everything is focused, if God is the center of every decision, of every song you sing, of every person you hire, of every business that you want to partner with every idea of building expansion or whatever, if God is the center of it, you know it's coming from a pure place and a solid place, and that you can stand firm on that. So you got to get that nucleus, you got to get that centerpiece strong, and that happens through the daily intimate relationship with God.
That's good. I love that piece, what you said right there. And I want to hit that again, that there's a difference between having God at the top of your list and having him at the center of your life.
Yep.
That's huge. That's
He's
huge.
got to be at the center. He's got to be at the center.
And so can I ask, and now I know we're getting a little personal, and so you can share, as much as you want to or not, but what are some of your, if you don't mind sharing a little bit, some of your personal practices? What does that look like for you? Habits that you have adopted to engage in that daily intimacy, not as a worship leader, but as a leader who worships. What are some intentional practices that you regularly make a part of your life?
I make sure, first of all, every day. Now I'm not as consistent with it. Of course, with having kids, it's a little different. Almost every day is a different challenge. But I have to make time for the time when it can just be me and God, just me and him. And most of the time, not doing a lot of talking, but trying to do more listening than talking. So making sure we have that daily time that we plug in together. Because I know that he's the source. And if I'm unplugged from the source, then my light is going to be dim the rest of the day. So I got to make sure I'm plugged into the source so my battery doesn't go out. And I make sure, me and my wife, we make sure that we are always in a posture of giving. Always in whatever way that looks like. If that looks like, having a sacrifice eating because someone calls and you trying to, talk them through a life situation, or if, someone needs some financial help and you have a little bit that you can spare, just time, making sure that we value our time, but we always are looking in ways to give, because we know that when we give out, we know that God is never going to allow us to be empty. So the more that we give, the more he pours in, which means the more that we can give, which means the more he can pour in, which means the more we can give. So those things, because again, we always want to be seen as leaders that have a heart of giving. So those are two of the daily practices that I can think of.
That's good.
Like at the top of my head, that I kind of make sure that we implement every day. We really are intentional about every day trying to find some way that we can say we gave today. We gave something today. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's resources, whatever it is, but we can say I gave today. Because I think if you are a leader that doesn't give, that's always receiving, it's selfish, and then you end up, getting puffed up, thinking that everyone has to give to you, but always wanting to be in a posture of giving.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note too, and I can say this because I know you, that you lead at a high level, that you have a lot of things pulling on you and pulling for your time. And so when you're saying this, when you're talking about giving of yourselves, giving of your time, giving of your finances, giving of your family, whatever that may be, that you're not saying that flippantly. I know that you're not just someone who has all the time in the world to sit around figuring out how you can give it away. And so you're really talking about sacrifice. You were talking about a self-sacrificial form of leadership, which is in and of itself an act of worship.
Yep.
And that is directly tied into that giving that you were talking about.
Yeah. God in his word, he says, for God so loved the world that he gave.
Yeah.
And what did he give? His only son. The reason why we're able to have access to the Father is because of the sacrifice of Jesus. So he loved us so much that he gave. He gave. So we have to follow that model to give. And we know that when we give, the overflow of that, the outcome of that is, it saves the world, literally.
Yes. And I think it's important for us as leaders to grab onto that because, like you said, we're often either one of two things, so focused on either receiving or just feel like, oh, but I've got so much to do. I've got a team to manage and I've got this thing to build and that thing to do. And I've got the list and all of this. And my time is already so full. When you talk about someone who is leading, we're talking about a full life, a full schedule.
Right.
And yet, and like you talked about the model of Jesus, and yet there's this constant posture of giving to the team, giving to the people, giving to the crowd, always an outpouring.
Always.
And so if we were to expand to the next layer, so we kind of talked about just your personal sort of intimate place with that, but for the leaders who are listening, let's expand to that next layer of, okay, I have centered everything in my life around this nucleus of God, and I'm committing myself to leading a lifestyle of worship because I'm recognizing that my leadership is a form of worship. So how does that translate out into the next layer of how I lead my team? How do I lead in and through worship? What are some things that I'm doing as a leader to keep my team cycling around that nucleus and to actually be leading those closest to me from an understanding that what we're doing is a form of worship?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll try to answer two ways. With two things. One, as a leader, if you teach your team to always think of the team always over yourself. So I have my team, I always present a question before them. You should be asking yourself, what does the team need from me in this moment? So every moment, take a second and say, what does the team need from me for this moment? Whether it's a song, whether it's an outing, whether it's handling a situation or whatever. What does the team need from me in this moment? So that way it always postures ourselves to think of the team first. Always in a posture of how can I serve the team? What does the team need from me? That's one of the things because when you create a culture of that, when you create a team of that, it creates a culture of that. So even when new people join the team, they see that everybody is serving one another and they just jump in line and they just start adapting their personal preferences to this is how this team works.
Yeah.
This team is a team of servants. And what is it that the team needs from me for this moment? Like, what is it? Do I need to do more or do I need to do less? Like, which one? Do I need to help or do I need to take charge? Do I need to fall back or, do more? The other thing is I am a very, as a worship leader, I study the tabernacle a lot. That's my thing. So the inner court, outer court, holy of holies. And the Ark of the Covenant, represents the glory of God, right? But no one could carry the Ark by themselves. Like nobody could carry the ark by themselves. It always required for people to carry it. And they all had equal weight. Nobody carried so much than the others. There was always a team effort in carrying the weight.
Yeah.
And when somebody isn't carrying their weight, it gets unbalanced. It starts rocking. Somebody tries to do something good to help assist it, and they touch it, and now their life is on the line because they weren't supposed to be carrying that, all because the team wasn't working together. So like I wear a shirt by my friend Trinity in Orlando, lead worship like lives depend on it. It does. Like we lead worship like I carry this weight, this glory, I carry it like lives depend on it, because they do. But we do it as a team so that everybody helps and everybody reaps the benefit as well. So asking that question of what does the team need from me in this moment, and knowing that we carry this together. We win together, we lose together.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
So another question that I have is, so we've talked about the idea that leadership in and of itself is a form of worship. That is part of our sacrifice and our offering before the Lord, is living out our leadership. But also, how is worship itself, the act and the art of worship, which doesn't necessarily have to be singing. I know you said we always relate it to music and singing, but there are other ways to worship. How is the art and act of worship a tool? How do we see it being used as a tool in scripture? And how is it possibly if we think about a leader's toolbox, all the different tools that we have as leaders, and there's a lot of different things that we would put in there, but I wonder for how many of us, is worship, the act and art of worship, is it one of the tools in our toolbox? And if not, what are we missing out on? How is worship itself a kingdom advancing tool? And what are some practical ways that leaders can incorporate the art and act of worship into their time with their team? Someone who says, look, I understand that worship is powerful. Worship is one of the many tools that God has given us, but I'm not a worship leader. And so what does it look like to actually worship together, to lead worship with your team? And how is that a tool that we miss out on?
I think, I think that, again, because we try to put worship in a box of it being just music and just singing, we disqualify ourselves. But there are many things, many acts that assist, I'll say, in worship. You got things that are visual, things that are audible. Like for example, I'm gonna answer your question, but I tell them, like, my sound and tech people, like, you lead worship with what you do. Because our job as a worship team is to, I tell my people, our job is to facilitate a place where people can come and meet with God. Whatever that means, I'm facilitating this place where people can meet with God. So with me, I'm singing and playing, but with you, you have a gifting that God has given you to create visual presentations of God that I can't do audibly. The light scenes and how you transition certain lights to match certain moods of songs, how you bring certain colors that create certain emotions that draw people into what God is saying in that moment. That's just as effective as what somebody is saying over a microphone. So whatever gift and talent you have, and people who don't do that, but who are strong in prophetic areas, who give words of knowledge, who prophesy, who see, those things aid in the worship encounters. And if that's what God has given you, then that's what you use. But if you are stifling that because it's not what you think is the popular thing to do during worship, it hinders what you do as a leader, because every leader has strengths and every leader has weaknesses. And if you're always afraid to lead with something that you don't feel is popular, your people will miss out on that. And also, when you step out of that boat with your act of worship, it again shows that you are a leader that doesn't have a problem with being vulnerable, that doesn't have a problem with lifting your hands in worship, that doesn't have a problem with jumping or clapping, or those expressions of worship that we sometimes as leaders can feel like is above us because we're leaders. We have to be, all together and all of that. But showing that vulnerability and showing that nothing matters more than my response to the presence of God. So I'm not going to allow my physical body or my mental state to keep me from responding to God and giving him the praise and worshiping him the way that he's deserving of, So I hope that answered that. I was trying to.
No, it does. It really, and I think that vulnerability piece
Yeah.
too is huge, because worship, whether we're talking about in an actual, moment of worship in a service, or even just the idea of living a lifestyle of worship, it is a very vulnerable and sacrificial place. And it requires that we as leaders tap into that place of vulnerability that we don't always like to show.
Right.
But that is so important and critical, because ultimately as kingdom leaders, we are leaders, but we're fully submitted elsewhere.
Yes.
And we are leaders who are following where God is at work and just trying to come alongside and join him. And that requires that submitted, surrendered vulnerability. I love that.
Yep.
So if we had, the last thing that I'll ask you is, if we have some listeners who say, you know what, I want to go and I want to change my leadership this week. I want to go into my staff meeting on Monday. I want to go with my team on Tuesday. I want to put this into practice. I want to understand and recognize that my leadership is an act of worship, and that worship itself is a tool that it shifts the atmosphere. It transforms our people. It can even transform our organization. So what do I do if they say, man, give me one or two, practical things that I can go in on Monday or the next time that I am with my team and say, hey, we're going to take a second and we're going to do this. What would it be? What are some things that any average leader could put into practice and feel qualified to do with their team to embrace worship as part of their leadership?
This is going to be it's going to sound like it's so cliche, but I'm going to hopefully be able to explain it or give more detail.
Okay.
Pray. Prayer with the team. I'll say that. Prayer. Prayer is where we get our instruction. Prayer is where we get the tools and the ideas and the plans for what we want, or what the purpose of our team should be. Again, because God's got to be the center of it. Remember, so everything's got to come from Him. The language of faith is prayer. And, that's how we communicate. It's how we speak to God, is through prayer. So prayer is going to be the key, because you may feel that certain things about your team aren't well, but through prayer, God can show you, yes, it is. You just tweak it. Don't throw it out. Just do this. It's exactly what you all are supposed to be doing, but you kind of on the wrong street. Just come over a street and you'll be right in the lane. Or you'll find some things that are not working because you're trying to be like the other church, or you're trying to be like the church on TV, and it's not working. That's not what you're called to do. That's not your mission. That's not the focus that I want your church to be on. But you won't know that unless you're in prayer.
Yeah.
Because, we don't wrestle with flesh and blood. We wrestle against principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. And the only way to fight those spiritual things is to fight them with a spiritual weapon. And our strongest spiritual weapon is prayer. So we can't fight. We can't get instruction. We can't find instruction without the language of prayer. So I think prayer is going to lead to all of the other things. Prayer and finding out what is the purpose of this team and how are we going to carry that out. You're only going to get that through prayer. Through prayer, God's going to, Holy Spirit, going to download things to people, and then it'll come out that way. But if it's just whole bunch of man-made ideas, it's gonna be a circus.
Mm.
So I mean, I know that's such a general answer, but like that's it, because everything is gonna have to flow out of that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like so sincere, fervent prayer, not
Yeah.
just this one time. We just gonna pray this one time for
Mm-hmm.
an hour, and that's gonna be it. It's got to be a culture and a lifestyle of prayer, so that way your daily, that daily intimate relationship with God, you get an intimate relationship with God by talking to Him. How do you
Yeah.
talk to Him? In prayer.
Yeah.
So that has to be a part of it. You know, that the consistent prayer will give you the instruction for how to turn the team around or to change the team, and how to get them to focus one way. It's got to be through prayer. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I love is that two things that strike me in what you're just saying is, one, it takes us back to the basics. And I think
Yep.
it's easy for us as leaders to overcomplicate
Yep.
all the
Oh,
time.
Yep.
Overcomplicate things because, we're leading these big organizations, or we have teams of hundreds, or the church is growing, whatever it may be, wherever the context that you may be leading in, and all of a sudden things start ramping up and we're overcomplicating it, when the reality is, and even I love what you said, because how often do we see Jesus model that in his life? How often is he sneaking away to be
Right.
with the Father, or teaching his team? They said, teach us how to pray.
Right.
Because they saw the value of that. And like you said, that's where the vision comes from. That's where the strategy comes from. There is no strategy like divine strategy, straight from the mouth of heaven.
There's a worship leader. I can't remember who it might be Paris. I can't remember who it is. But just thinking about prayer and Jesus. Jesus did two things when he was on the earth. He only did two things. He prayed, and he did what the Father told him in prayer.
Yeah.
Everything Jesus did when he walked on the earth, he was either praying or doing what he heard the Father tell him to do in prayer. That was it. Like nothing else. All the miracles, it was because God told him to do it in prayer. All of the people to choose to go to this place to do this, he heard. And when he got finished doing his miracles and doing his things, he would always go somewhere and retreat and do what? He was somewhere.
Yep.
And the disciples saw that, so he was like, hey, teach us how to do that, because apparently you got something that we don't have. And hey, this is how you do it. You pray and do the will of the Father that you heard in prayer. So as leaders, we got to get back to the main thing, like pray, do what we hear in prayer. As long as we pray and we do what we heard in prayer, and not get it convoluted and try to put our little 2 cents in it.
Yeah.
No, do what you heard in prayer.
Yeah. I love how simple it is. And we overcomplicate. We need all these things, and we need to do this with our team. And no, we need to pray and do what we hear the Father saying. That's so good. And what I love about it too is that this is for every leader, because I realize that not everyone listening is leading in a faith context where they can go in and say, okay, team, hey, we're going to pray together right now. But every leader of faith is able to put that into practice. If you're leading in an organization or a corporate culture or whatever it may be, where you can't actually go in and tell everyone, hey, we're going to pray right now, you still have the ability to practice this powerful tool.
Yes. Yep.
And to lead from the overflow of that.
Yep. Sure.
Yeah. This is good. This was such good stuff, Chris. Was there anything else on your heart, or anything that came to mind that you thought of that you wanted to share? It doesn't have to be. I just want to make sure that we don't leave anything unsaid.
No, I don't think, and nothing came to me that was like, oh yeah, let me put that in there. No, I don't have anything. Not this time.
Awesome. This was so great. And what you said was so valuable and easy to apply. And you shared so much of your own heart and life with us. And so on behalf of everyone listening, I just want to say thank you for being here at the table today.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Thank you. I consider it an honor. Trust me, I really do.
Thanks for listening to the Table Leadership Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the resources that were discussed at the table today and to connect with today's guest. Remember to subscribe to the Table Podcast and follow along on social media at The Table Leadership. Visit thetableleadership.com to learn more about current courses and coaching opportunities. And finally, you can connect with me, your host, at cyonedgerton.com or on social media at cyonedgerton. I look forward to the next time that you pull up a seat at the table.